My name is Grace. I'm 72 years old, and I own a little bakery on Main Street in a quiet Vermont town. Folks around here know me for my pecan pie and soft rolls, but few know the story that shaped the woman behind the counter. For most of my life, I carried a promise like a weight in my chest. I swore I would never speak of what happened in that yellow house with white curtains. I thought if I just buried it deep enough, time would erase it. But silence doesn't heal wounds. It preserves them like frost on a dead flower, keeping pain fresh, no matter how many seasons pass. And the truth is, there are still too many children living in houses like the one I grew up in. That's why I'm telling this now. Not for sympathy, not for closure, but because someone out there might be in the dark, thinking no one would believe them. If you're listening and carrying something that no child should ever carry, I want you to know you're not invisible. You're not alone. And yes, there is a way out. I never thought I'd be the one to say that. But here I am, an old woman in a flower-stained apron, finally ready to speak. Not as a victim, as someone who survived. This story isn't easy to hear. It's even harder to tell. But it might just be what someone needs to finally step into the light. So if you're ready, I'll begin. I grew up in a small town, tucked into the hills of southern Ohio. Back then, it felt like the world stopped at the edge of our main street, where the barber knew your name, and neighbors waved from their porches with glasses of sweet tea. My childhood home sat at the end of a gravel road lined with maple trees, a pale yellow house with white curtains that fluttered in the breeze like everything was just right. It had a tidy lawn my mother kept trimmed with a rusty push mower and a porch swing that creaked every time you sat in it. The windows were always clean. My mother believed even dust could be a sign of moral decay. We had a bird feeder out front, a rosebush by the steps, and in the early years I believed I was one of the lucky ones. My father was the town preacher, tall and broad-shouldered, with a booming voice that filled every Sunday service. People listened to him like he had a direct line to heaven. He wore starched shirts, polished shoes, and never missed a day at the church, unless he was sick, which he never was. My mother was the local elementary school teacher, strict, orderly, always composed. She kept her hair pulled tight, her skirts below the knee, and her tone clipped enough to quiet a room with a single word. At school, she was respected. At home, she was silent, always watching, always waiting. To the outside world, we were the perfect family, a God-fearing man, a devoted wife, an obedient daughter. The yellow house stood as proof of that perfection, with its white curtains swaying like some kind of gentle lie. Inside, things were quieter. Not peaceful, just muted. I learned early that loud laughter could bring a scolding. Speaking without being asked was considered rude. That silence in our house was a form of survival. Still, I found joy in little things. I loved making paper dolls, chasing lightning bugs in the backyard, and curling up with my books in the attic when no one was looking. My mother let me help bake sometimes, handing me measured cups and correcting the way I stirred. My father would ruffle my hair now and then, call me his little lamb, and for a while I believed I was safe. But there were signs. The way my mother tensed when my father cleared his throat. The way the air seemed to freeze when he walked through the front door. How we always had to be clean, quiet, perfectly presentable before 6 o'clock when his key turned in the lock and the rhythm of the house changed. He wasn't cruel in the way movies show bad men. He didn't yell often. He didn't need to. His presence was heavy enough to silence a room. His expectations were unspoken but impossible to miss. My mother lived to meet them. I lived to avoid upsetting them. I used to count the seconds when I heard the key in the lock. 1, 2, 3. Breathe. My heart would start racing even before I saw his face. It became a kind of alarm, a signal that whatever safety I'd felt during the day was now over. When I turned 8, something shifted. I can't explain exactly how or why, but the way he looked at me started to feel different. He lingered in the doorway of my room longer than before. He touched my shoulder just a little too long. He asked questions that didn't sound like questions at all. My mother started leaving more often for church events, prayer circles, ladies' luncheons. She'd dress in her nicest skirts and leave me alone with him. At first it didn't seem odd. I was a child. What did I know about danger dressed as routine? But then came my birthday. That day is burned into me like a brand. I wore the blue dress she gave me. I clutched the doll she sewn with her own hands. I smiled through lunch, pretending not to notice the way my father's eyes followed me. That evening, the wind didn't move the curtains. The air in the house felt too still. I remember standing in the kitchen, the sink full of dishes, my doll on the counter, and his voice calling me from the next room. Just my name, nothing else. But it chilled me. I didn't understand the kind of fear that keeps growing long after it's arrived. I only knew that something terrible was on its way, that the yellow house I thought I loved had started to whisper something different, something cold, something that would never leave me. By the time I lay down that night, staring at the shadows on the ceiling, I wasn't a little girl anymore. Not really. I didn't know what was coming. But my bones did. My breath did. The white curtains stopped moving, and I stopped believing that house had anything soft left inside it. I turned 8 on a Wednesday. That morning the house smelled like cinnamon toast, and the sun poured through the windows like it had been waiting for this day too. My mother gave me a wrapped package at breakfast, and inside was a blue cotton dress with white lace trim and a handmade doll stitched from leftover fabric scraps. I twirled in the living room, wearing that dress, the hem brushing my knees just right, and named the doll Abigail after a character from one of my storybooks. My mother smiled, but didn't hug me. She wasn't the hugging type. Still, for a while, I felt light, like maybe 8 would be a good year. She had a church meeting that evening. It was a women's gathering. She never missed something about prayer and casserole sign-ups. She patted my hair, told me to be good, and left through the back door. Her shoes clicking across the porch as I stood in the kitchen holding Abigail close to my chest. My father was in his chair by the window pretending to read. When she left, he didn't look up right away. The house fell quiet. Too quiet, like even the walls were holding their breath. I didn't know what to do, so I just stood there waiting. He called my name, not loudly, just enough to make my stomach twist. I walked to the doorway where he sat, and he told me the sink was dirty, that my mother hadn't washed it right. I looked. It looked fine to me. But I didn't say that. You didn't disagree with him. He told me to clean it. I was small, too short for the faucet, but I tried. I climbed onto a stool and scrubbed with the sponge, even though the cold water stung my fingers. He stood behind me too close and said things that didn't make sense, that I was slow. That is why God took the others and left only me. When I dropped a plate and it clattered into the basin, he said it again slower. Good for nothing. I felt the tears start, but blinked fast to stop them. He didn't like crying. It made him meaner. He told me to take off my dress. I thought I misheard. I turned around and asked if I could go put on pajamas instead. He stepped closer and said it again. Take off your dress. I froze. Something in me knew this wasn't about chores anymore. I was 8, but I knew shame. I knew fear. And in that moment, they wrapped around me like a cold blanket. I don't remember every detail, only flashes. The sound of my doll hitting the floor, The cold air on my skin, the way his eyes didn't look like my father's anymore. They were empty and hungry, not confused, not angry, just wrong. Afterward, he tossed my dress at me and told me to clean up. I knelt on the floor, numb, scrubbing a spot that wouldn't go away. My knees ached on the tile. My chest hurt from holding in the sound I wanted to scream. That night I crawled under my bed, not into it. I hugged Abigail and tried to remember the good parts of the day. The dress, the toast, the way my mother's shoes sounded on the porch. But nothing felt real anymore. Not even me. I was 9 when I stopped believing my mother didn't know. Until then, I told myself she couldn't see it, that she was too busy, or too afraid, or too far away each time it happened. That kind of lie is easy to believe when you're desperate for someone to protect you. But one night, after a long day at school and another silent dinner, he told me to go to my room. I knew what that meant. I moved slowly, hoping he'd forget, hoping my mother would speak up. She didn't. She just folded her napkin and cleared the plates. I walked into my room, my legs trembling under me. I didn't even take off my shoes. I just sat on the bed and waited. The door creaked open and he stepped in, carrying that same awful calm he always wore. But this time something was different. The door didn't shut all the way. It stayed cracked just enough to see the hallway light cutting across the floor. I didn't think much of it until I looked up, and through that narrow gap I saw her. My mother, standing in the hall, still as a statue. Our eyes met. Mine was wide and pleading, her cold and unreadable. She didn't flinch. She didn't cry. She didn't move. I waited for her to do something, say my name, step forward, scream, anything. But she just watched. And when he started, she stayed. Her face never changed. She didn't look away. She didn't step in. After a minute, maybe less, she reached out and gently pushed the door closed. That soft click broke something in me, something permanent. I had always feared my father, but that night I stopped loving my mother. Not because she was silent, because she chose silence over me. She could have opened that door and stopped him, but instead, she shut it tighter. It wasn't just betrayal. It was abandonment. The kind that makes your chest hollow and your skin feel too thin. I didn't cry that night. Not until he left and I curled under my blanket and realized the one person I thought might save me had made her choice. After that, I never looked at her the same. She still made my lunches, still pressed my uniforms, still told the neighbors I was shy. But in my mind, she had already left. I was alone in that house, alone with a monster, and worse, alone with someone who handed him the keys. Miss Parker taught 6th grade English, and she had a way of making words feel like little lifeboats. She wore her hair in a bun, so loose it always seemed ready to fall, and she smiled with her whole face even when she was tired. I liked sitting in her classroom. It felt warmer than the others, softer somehow, like the air carried less weight. She noticed things. I don't know how long she'd been watching me before she said something, but I started to catch her eyeing me more than once. Not in a nosy way, not suspicious, just quiet and concerned. She'd pause when I turned in homework with the corners chewed, or when I winced reaching for my pencil. One afternoon she asked me to stay behind after class. I froze, heart racing. That always meant trouble at home. But when the last kid shuffled out and the door clicked shut, she didn't yell. She sat on the edge of her desk and waited like she was giving me time. Then she asked if I was okay. Just that. No lecture, no assumptions, no pressure. Are you okay? It cracked something in me that had been holding for too long. I wanted to say yes. That was the safe answer. That was the only answer I'd ever given. But my throat tightened and I couldn't make the word come out. She didn't push. She just nodded and said she was there if I ever needed to talk. Her voice was calm, no pity, just space. Space to breathe, to be seen. I didn't realize how much I'd needed that until it was offered. For weeks after that, she kept finding ways to check in. A smile at my locker. A soft question slipped between reading assignments. She never said too much, just enough to remind me she hadn't forgotten. It was the first time an adult looked at me and saw something beneath the surface. Not my good grades, not my place, yes, ma'am. But the girl is behind all that. The one who flinched when someone raised their voice. The one who always kept one eye on the clock. I haven't talked yet. Couldn't. The words were still trapped behind fear. But her presence started to change things. Not overnight, not all at once. But slowly, like light creeping into a locked room. Every time she said my name, it sounded like care instead of control. Every time she waited for me to answer, it felt like permission to exist. Not as a problem, not as someone broken, just as a girl who mattered. That was the beginning, not the end. But something softer. Something that told me maybe I wasn't as invisible as I thought. It happened on a rainy Thursday, the kind of day when the sky stays grey and everything feels too heavy. Miss Parker had asked me again if I was okay, but this time she didn't expect an answer right away. She just waited. Something in me cracked open. Maybe it was the sound of the rain on the windows. Maybe it was the way she looked at me like I wouldn't have to carry it alone. My voice came out low and shaky, but I told her. Not everything. Just enough. She didn't blink, didn't gasp. She reached for a tissue and handed it to me with hands that didn't tremble. Then she sat down beside me and told me a secret of her own. When she was my age, someone in her family had hurt her too. She didn't name names, but she didn't have to. I'd never heard an adult say something like that before. It made my chest tighten and loosen at the same time, like I'd been holding my breath for years without knowing it. She said she knew what it was like to be trapped in a house that looked fine on the outside, to smile for pictures while living in fear. She told me that what happened to me wasn't my fault, that the shame I carried wasn't mine to hold. I remember sitting there stunned by the fact that someone understood, really understood, not in a textbook way, in the way only someone who's lived it could. We didn't talk long that day, just enough to name it, to give the pain a shape. Before I left, she made me a promise, that we would figure it out together, that she wouldn't tell anyone unless I said it was time. But when I was ready, she would help me make it stop. In the days that followed, we made a plan, quietly, carefully. She taught me how to write down details, times, dates, what he said, what he did. She said if we had evidence, people would have to believe me. We practiced calm breathing. We came up with a phrase I could say in class if I felt unsafe. She told me I had more strength than I realized, that I was not just surviving, I was preparing. She gave me a small notebook, said it was mine and no one else's. I hid it under the loose floorboard in my closet. Every night after he left my room, I wrote in it with shaking hands. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was moving toward something, not away from fear, toward freedom, toward a future I hadn't dared imagine. Miss Parker believed me. That alone changed everything. But more than that, she stood beside me when I couldn't stand alone. That's how I knew I could do the rest. One day, when it was time, it was a Thursday. The air was thick and still, like even the wind knew not to move. I sat at the kitchen table staring at the pattern on the tablecloth, counting the tiny red flowers to calm my nerves. My heart beat too fast. My hands wouldn't stay still. That morning before school, I had slipped into the janitor's closet and taken an old mop head, frayed and damp, and tucked it into my backpack. I'd practiced the plan in my head 100 times. Walk in, go to the closet, swap it out, get out. No panic, no second guessing. When I got home, I moved quickly before my mother returned from the market. I went to the supply cabinet, where he kept the one he always used. My fingers shook as I lifted it, replaced it with the worn one from school, and shut the door. My chest was tight. My breath is shallow. But it was done. All that was left was to wait. Dinner was quiet. My father ate slowly as always, wiping his mouth with a cloth napkin after every bite. My mother asked if I had finished my spelling homework. I nodded. My voice didn't work that night. When the plates were cleared, she stood and excused herself, said she needed to check on a neighbor. She picked up her purse and walked out without looking back. The door clicked shut. I knew it wouldn't open again for at least an hour. He looked at me and told me to go upstairs, the way he always did. I stood legs barely steady beneath me and climbed each step like they were made of glass. In my room, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't hide. I sat on the edge of my bed and waited, holding on to the only thought that mattered. This could be the last time. This could be the end. He entered without knocking. His steps were slow, measured. He spoke like he always did. Calm, like this was normal, like I was nothing. But I wasn't anything. I had the notebook. I had the dates. I had the mop. It was tucked where Miss Parker told me to hide it, sealed in a bag with my trembling hands. I had taken pictures. I had written everything. It wasn't just a plan anymore. It was evidence. As it happened, I let my mind go somewhere else. I imagined the sun through the bakery windows. I imagined Miss Parker's voice. I imagined a life beyond this house. I didn't feel brave. I felt hollow. But underneath it all, there was a flicker, the tiniest flame of defiance. When it was over, I cleaned up like I always did. I scrubbed the floor, put the towel in the laundry, and folded my dress neatly. But inside, something had changed. I wasn't cleaning because I was scared. I was cleaning because I was done. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the window and watched the streetlight flicker, holding Abigail in one arm and the notebook in the other. I watched the sky turn pale, waiting for the first sound of birds. When morning came, I packed the mop in my backpack and buttoned my shirt with steady hands. I walked to school without looking back once at the yellow house with white curtains. It had taken everything in me to stay quiet for so long. But now, I had something louder than fear. I had proof. And for the first time, I believed it might actually be over. That night wasn't just the end of the abuse. It was the beginning of my voice, the beginning of my fight. And even though no one could see it yet, I knew the monster would fall. Because I wasn't alone anymore. And I wasn't afraid of him anymore either. It was a Tuesday morning when they came. I was sitting on the stairs halfway down, tying my shoe with shaking fingers. I heard the car doors slam first, then the sharp knock at the front door that didn't wait to be polite. My mother answered it, her voice firm and sweet, the way she always used with strangers. Then it shifted. A sudden breath caught in her throat. I stood not knowing what to do, but knowing it was time. I saw the uniforms before I saw their faces. 2 officers, one in front, one behind. They asked for my father. My mother looked confused, then terrified. She turned to call him, but her voice cracked halfway through his name. He came down the hallway like nothing was wrong, like they were guests. But his eyes were narrow, searching. I watched him scan the room, then stop on me. I didn't move. I didn't blink. I just stood at the bottom of the stairs and stared back. They read him his rights. Calm. Direct. He didn't speak. Just stood there with his hands out like he already knew. My mother reached for him, but he pulled away. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The handcuffs clicked. That sound is still in my bones. Not loud, but final. The sound of a monster being caught, of a door finally closing behind him. He looked at me once more as they led him out. I thought he might say something. Apologize. Curse. Plead. But he didn't. He just turned his head like I was a window he'd already walked past. My mother dropped to the floor, her hands covering her mouth, sobbing without words. I didn't go to her. I didn't kneel or cry or ask her why. I just stood there breathing like it was the first time in years. The house felt different without him in it. The silence was lighter. The air didn't press against my chest. I could feel my toes, my fingertips. I could feel myself like I hadn't in a long time. Miss Parker came to pick me up an hour later. She held my hand the whole way to the car. She didn't say much, just squeezed when I needed it. That night I slept without waking. No footsteps in the hallway. No doors creaking open. Just the sound of wind outside and my own steady breath. Justice didn't fix everything. It didn't erase what happened. But it ended the worst part. And that was enough to begin something new. Something mine. Today I wake up before the sun. I pull flour from the shelves, roll out dough with practiced hands, and open the doors to a little bakery where the scent of cinnamon and vanilla greets my neighbors. Most don't know the road that led me here. They just know I remember their orders and always ask about their grandkids. But every so often someone lingers after the counter clears. They lower their voice, their eyes shift, and they ask how I got through it. That's when I tell them a piece of this story. Not all at once. Just enough to let them know healing is possible. I speak now. At schools. At churches. At shelters. I stand in front of rooms full of strangers and talk about the yellow house with white curtains. About a little girl who thought she'd be swallowed by silence. And the woman who gave her a voice. Miss Parker changed my life with 3 words. Are you okay? She didn't have a badge or a title. Just compassion and courage. That was enough. I tell this story not to dwell in the past, but to shine a light for someone still trapped in their own dark room. Someone who needs to hear that it's not their fault, that there is a way out, that they are not alone. If you're watching this and carrying something no one should have to carry, I want you to know your pain is real. But so is your strength. You're allowed to speak. You're allowed to ask for help. And even if your voice shakes, it still counts. And if you're someone who suspects, who sees the signs, please don't look away. Be the one who leans in, who asks the question, who listens. Because you don't have to fix everything. You just have to care. You can be someone's Miss Parker. You can change everything with a quiet moment and a steady heart. I still have hard days. I still carry scars. But I also carry joy. I carry warmth. I carry the strength of a girl who didn't give up, and the kindness of a woman who didn't walk away. This story is mine, but it belongs to so many. If it's yours too, I hope it helps you breathe a little easier tonight. Hope is real. Healing is slow, but both are possible, and both start with truth.